This is Chai Elemental, proud, angry, multiply disabled loudmouth, and you're listening to This Is For You, Carrie, a podcast retrospective of my disability justice blog that I've been writing for 10 years. In this, my first episode, I'm going to introduce what I'm doing with this podcast, as well as start actually doing it. I'll be reviewing my old blog entries from 5 ago, back when I was focused on destigmatizing mental illness, as opposed to disability justice, and discussing what I think I got right, and what I would change if I wrote the blog entries today. I'll be reviewing my introductory blog entry, as well as my entry on why it's messed up to tell a mentally ill person to, quote, be strong. Content warning, discussion of abuse, suicidal ideation, and multiple types of ableism, reclaimed slurs, mention of near-death experience. The following was written in December of 2016. My pen name is Mara Lee, and I loved Carrie Fisher. I don't say that lightly. I didn't know it was possible to care so much about someone I had never met. But Carrie Fisher was that important to me. While I'm a huge Star Wars nerd and I adored Leia Organa, it was Carrie Fisher's mental health advocacy that I admired most. Well, that's not exactly it, although I took strength from her stance on mental illness. I loved how unapologetically herself Carrie Fisher was. She was hilarious, witty, brave, a talented actress, a skilled writer, open and honest about her struggles with addiction and bipolar disorder, and she embraced her fans calling her Space Mom. I loved her personality. I'm mentally ill. Not bipolar like Carrie, but about everything but. I have been formally diagnosed with major depression, although I think double depression is more accurate, generalized anxiety disorder, borderline personality disorder, added to this list in mid-May when I finally accepted that diagnosis, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and otherwise specified dissociative disorder. Note, I'm pro-self-diagnosis, I just happen to have had the good fortune to be properly diagnosed by a professional. Every word Carrie spoke about mental illness made my brain jump up and down screaming, yes, exactly. In the absence of someone I knew in person to be my mental illness-related beacon of strength, I needed someone like Carrie. When I was first diagnosed with depression, I resolved to not shut up about it because I hated the stigma surrounding mental illness and wanted to do something about it. Carrie was my confirmation that I wasn't wrong to be so vocal about my mental illness. I'm also autistic. I'm planning to talk mostly about mental illness on this blog, more on that later, but being autistic is inexorably entwined with who I am. And autistic people often have special interests. A special interest is something that consumes an autistic person's life. We think about it all the time. We want to know everything about it. We won't shut up about it, verbally if we're capable, in any other form of communication if we're not. We can hyper-focus on it for hours, etc., etc. Carrie Fisher became a special interest of mine when Star Wars The Force Awakens came out and I watched General Organa walk off of her ship to greet Han Solo, and my tiny lesbian heart could not handle the General's awesomeness. I had never had a special interest in a person before. For the longest time, I thought it was my first celebrity crush, but it was something more than that. And it was something more than a special interest. Maybe it's the shock and sadness talking. Maybe I'm just that nerdy. Maybe my hyperempathy is having a field day after the outpouring of grief I've seen on social media over Carrie's death. But the statement, I loved Carrie Fisher, does not feel inaccurate. And I want to do something in her memory. I'm not famous, and probably never will be, unless this pen name ends up on any of the sci-fi or fantasy novels I have in the works. But like I mentioned before, Carrie Fisher and her badassery were my confirmation that I was doing the right thing by trying to destigmatize mental illness. So, here's this blog. I'm going to try to post about once a month on a topic related to mental illness and stigma. Neurotypicalism in the medical-industrial complex, mood disorders versus scary mental disorders and the differences in how they're perceived, the relationship mental illness has with the horror genre. Trust me, I have plenty of soapboxes. I'm also prone to blathering about my personal life, so I will probably post occasionally, okay, maybe a ton, about my collection of mental illnesses and how they affect me. If I may be frank, I don't know what I'm doing. I have never set out to destigmatize mental illness in this format before. Hell, I've never done anything to destigmatize mental illness, besides run my mouth to my friends. And this is the internet, so I'm afraid I'll do something wrong that will be immortalized, or get tons of hate that my sensitive autistic ass is not going to be able to handle. But as Carrie Fisher once said about MI people pursuing their dreams, stay afraid, but do it anyway. What's important is the action. You don't have to wait to be confident, just do it, and eventually the confidence will follow. So, I'm doing it anyway. This is for you, Carrie. That was almost a decade ago, and a lot has changed since then. I have lost interest in the Star Wars sequel trilogy after I heard such negative things about the rise of Skywalker that I didn't bother seeing it, and I suspect that a big reason for that was that Carrie Fisher wasn't alive to do punch-up on the script, as she was a talented script doctor. My pen name is no longer Mara Lee. It's Chai Elemental. I have learned that neurotypicalism is not the word for oppression of neurodivergent people. The correct term is neuronormativity. I escaped from my abusive parents and cut myself off from generational wealth in order to try to recover from generational trauma. I've gotten married and am getting divorced. I have even developed new disabilities and had other disabilities diagnosed. Hell, I even died! Yes, really. I have been clinically dead, thanks to a surgery that went sideways. And I have been writing This Is For You, Carrie blog entries for almost 10 years. It has been a while since I was able to write one each month, but I'm still writing the blog. I'm currently drafting an entry on the terrifying ableism of the political left in the so-called United States. This blog has evolved from being about mental illness and autism to being about disability justice, but I still try to avoid writing about forms of ableism I don't experience, like I'm an expert on them. But while I have a very small number of dedicated readers, I want to reach a wider audience, especially since I've put so much time and work into this project, and it seems like podcasts are pretty popular, so since I was finally able to get a decent microphone for my music-making projects, fuck it, I'll turn my blog into a podcast. I have developed a lot as a writer and as an activist since I started writing the blog, so what I'm going to do to start out is sort of a retrospective. I'm going to share my old entries and then reflect on them, especially what I would change if I wrote them now. Now, my blog entries tend to be relatively short, so I'm going to read and reflect on 2 entries per podcast episode, at least to start with. And I'm going to start with an entry I wrote in December of 2016 about how, quote, be strong or, quote, stay strong are kind of fucked up things to say to a mentally ill person. With that said, let's get started. I have a lot of feelings about the idea of, quote, strength when it comes to mental illness. In the wake of Carrie Fisher's death, I have seen internet posts exhorting people to be, quote, strong because it's what Carrie would want. Unfortunately, that hurts all 3 of my feelings. Said feelings are awfully muddled, and I hope that making this post can help me sort them out. That's something else you might see quite a bit on this blog, muddled feelings and opinions. I tend to be very strong in my convictions, but sometimes I'm just not sure about stuff, and I think it's important to normalize the process of going from not sure to sure. Nobody was born sure. Regarding the idea of being strong while mentally ill, what does that actually mean? Well, from the lips or keyboards of NTs, being strong seems to mean not showing symptoms because I'm uncomfortable seeing them. From these same people, strong can also mean deciding to not experience symptoms as if that were even possible. Claiming that such a thing is possible is invalidating and insulting to MI people. If a person could simply decide to make their symptoms go away, then what they're experiencing wouldn't be an illness, would it? Note, I'm not talking about the use of techniques such as cognitive behavioral therapy to confront symptoms and work through them so they aren't so debilitating. CBT is my jam. These aforementioned definitions of, quote, strength, the ones touted by NTs that are unfair to MI people, are garbage. Many MI people feel emotions much more acutely, or depending on the illnesses less acutely, than NTs. This means that many of us grieve differently. Seeing us be visibly different makes NTs uncomfortable, and that is why they trot out the idea of, quote, being strong in the face of tragedy. It's sanist and it needs to stop. So if sanist NTs are using unfair definitions of, quote, strong to refer to behavior and attitude when dealing with mental illness symptoms and grief, what does, quote, strong mean to the MI community? Well, no community is a monolith, so when I say something along the lines of, say, the autistic community prefers identity first language, which is true, by the way, I am referring to a majority, and I am aware that not every person in the community I'm discussing feels the same way. But I'm not sure I can even say what the majority of the MI community feels about the meaning of the word strength in the context of being mentally ill. As far as I can tell, a common definition of, quote, strength in the MI community is being able to do things despite one's mental illness. These aforementioned things can seem small to NTs, like brushing one's teeth or attending class. They can be bigger, like not committing suicide despite the signals in your brain whispering, do it, do it. Quote, strength can also mean being able to face the NT world and say, look, I can't do this thing right now due to my mental illness. I have to take care of myself instead. I personally am cagey about using the word strength or strong publicly when it comes to mental illness. Staying alive when it would be understandable to die from one's mental illness is often considered strong, but to me it feels disrespectful to call those who died of their mental illnesses weak. I similarly think that many MI people do sometimes feel weak due to their mental illness, and there is no shame in that. Some may find comfort in radical vulnerability, a topic I might cover later, or even, paradoxical as it sounds, find strength in weakness. In my own head, I have often defined, quote, strength as staying alive in the face of suicidality and when I don't feel like I even am alive. I have CPTSD and like to refer to trauma as the kind of murder where nobody dies, a phrase I stole from an Emily Autumn lyric. I will never know the person I would have been had I not been traumatized. When I think of how CPTSD has left me an empty shell that mimics her surroundings instead of a real person, I feel like there is no point in living anymore. I'm not even alive in the first place, right? But I tell myself that I should be stronger than those thoughts of not living anymore, and I put down the cup of bleach and continue to breathe. This conquering of suicidal ideation is the definition of, quote, strength that helps me the most. It is not a definition that I believe is universal. I think the best definition of, quote, strength in the context of mental illness that I can present here in the conclusion of this post is being like Carrie Fisher, unashamed of being who you are in all of your mentally ill awesomeness. If you can't be, quote, strong in other ways, if you can't get out of bed today, if you can't take that shower, if you can't go to work, if you cry over Carrie's death, that's okay. There is no shame in that. And there is no shame in struggling with internalized sanism. Most, if not all of us, have a degree of it, and it can be quite the stumbling block when it comes to advocating for oneself and the MI community. Carrie was unique and special in how she conducted her advocacy. I aspire to be like her, but it may take me a while. The Carrie Fisher quote I have chosen to accompany this post feels apropos for the topic. I'm mentally ill. I can say that. I'm not ashamed of that. I survived that. I'm still surviving it, but bring it on. Yeah, I had forgotten that I used to end every blog entry with a Carrie Fisher quote. She was very quotable, but eventually I ran out of quotes. So, this is an interesting one to start with, because I have a lot of very different feelings about what it means to be, quote, strong as a mentally ill person, but I'll get to those later. I'll start with what I think sane people mean when they tell mentally ill people to be, quote, strong, and I am specifically saying sane where I said neurotypical in the original blog entry because, well, I was wrong to say neurotypical in the original blog entry. While mental illnesses are neurodivergencies, there are plenty of sane neurodivergent people, and they still often are sanist. Don't get me started on autistic people who shit on personality disorders, although I will talk about egotypicalism, a word I coined to mean sanism against people with personality disorders, in a later episode. I still think I had a point when I said that when sane people tell mentally ill people to be, quote, strong, they mean either don't experience mental illness symptoms or it's okay that you have mental illness symptoms, just don't visibly have them in front of me because that makes me uncomfortable. Time has only confirmed that shit for me. Not to mention my ex-mother used to gaslight me about how I couldn't have depression because I was, quote, too strong, which is not anywhere even in the general area of how mental illness works. Sane people think that emotional strength is basically the same as sanity, which is fucking annoying in addition to being sanist. What, quote, strong means to mentally ill people now. I suspect that far more mentally ill people really resent being called strong than I thought a decade ago. When I recently asked on social media if my fellow can't have grapefruit people resent being told be strong or stay strong, every person who replied said yes. Operation Explain the Joke. Most if not all psych meds are contraindicated with grapefruit. That was a small number of people, but still, I don't know if I would have expected that 10 years ago. I don't think the mentally ill community has changed its mind significantly about the meaning of strength when applied to us by sane people in the past 10 years. I think I've just spent more time in community with my fellow insane people. I suspect that a pretty large percentage of the mentally ill community resents being told to be strong because we're so damn used to people meaning stop being crazy when they tell us that. Something I said 10 years ago was, staying alive when it would be understandable to die from one's mental illness is often considered, quote, strong. I used passive voice in that sentence, but I meant that the people thinking that not dying by suicide due to mental illness were probably sane people, although some mentally ill people may also think it. I definitely used to think of myself as strong when my brain was trying to kill me, and I told it to fuck off. But 10 years ago, I also did say, it feels disrespectful to call those who died of their mental illnesses, quote, weak. And that somehow didn't stop me from thinking of myself as strong and that strength was a good thing when I told my suicidal ideation to fuck off. I even said I took, quote, strength from Carrie Fisher's activism and called her, quote, a beacon of strength. And yeah, I guess there was cognitive dissonance at work there. I still think of myself as someone who is learning how to be strong and for strength to be a positive thing, but not in terms of my mental health or notable lack thereof. More like in terms of doing shit that scares me because it's scary, not because I'm crazy. I mean, in terms of mental health, I think the sane definition of, quote, strength has poisoned that word for mentally ill people. In my original blog entry, I tried to spin being, quote, strong as a possible positive thing for mentally ill people by saying that being strong can mean being unashamed of who you are and all of your mentally ill awesomeness. I'm really not sure about that, past Chai. I think because of the sanest way, quote, strength is weaponized against mentally ill people, there's not really an appropriate way to sugarcoat that term. Unlearning internalized sanism is undoubtedly a good thing, but I don't think that's being strong, nor is having internalized sanism being weak. For fuck's sake, considering how common and acceptable sanism is, a lot of mentally ill people may not even have the resources to unlearn sanism, and that's not a weakness. Past Chai said that there was no shame in having internalized sanism, but there's no weakness in it either. And unlearning sanism is difficult as shit, but it's not strength. One more thing about being told to, quote, be strong as a mentally ill person, that whole what doesn't kill you makes you stronger cliche, ugh. I feel like saying, it's okay, your trauma made you stronger, to someone who has experienced trauma and has a mental illness or multiple mental illnesses as a result is really fucking sanist. It's incredibly invalidating in addition to being total bullshit. I also feel like it's rooted in the abled idea that if you just smile hard enough and eat enough vegetables and what the fuck ever, you can avoid becoming disabled. Non-traumatized people don't want to think that they could develop a traumagenic disorder if they experience trauma. They'd rather believe that horrific adversity makes a person stronger. My trauma only made me weirder, harder to relate to, and more of a broken wretch of a human being. On that happy note, I think that's all I have for now. Thank you to my Patreon supporters, Ace, Emily, Hannah, and Max. It's only $1 a month to be as cool as them, and you get perks like being able to see my blog entries early, and the ability to vote on polls on blog entry topics. Until next time, this is Chai Elemental, signing off.